Welcome to Man in America, a voice of reason in a world gone mad. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. So maybe you've heard of the HAARP system. So it's this giant field of antennas that the military-industrial complex has built up in nowhere, Alaska, that can be used to control the ionosphere, so they say. Now, people who have researched it probably come to conclusions that it can be used to potentially control weather, maybe even cause earthquakes, and a whole lot more. So according to my guest today, Leigh Dundas, who's an amazing freedom fighter, the HAARP system can do a lot more than just that. And what she's going to be talking about today is actually how the HAARP system can be used to actually control brain waves, to target individuals or particular populations, and that it may have been used in the past to cause mass violence, things like the Rwanda genocide even. And so we're going to be getting into not just some weird theories of stuff, but actually some hard evidence that shows from the scientists who work on it that this system and this technology can be used to basically control people in a mass way. We're talking take an entire city or town of people and cause depression or anger or happiness. So this is wild technology. So I hope you please enjoy the show. Finally, thank you for watching on Rumble and supporting a freedom fighting channel and platform. If you're watching on Rumble, thank you. Make sure you give a thumbs up, leave your comments, and engage and share this interview. So please enjoy the interview with Leigh Dundas. Leigh Dundas, it's such a pleasure to have you back on the show. And I feel like it's been forever. So thank you for being here with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I always, like I was saying before the show started, I just love my time talking about cool stuff with you. And yeah, I think it's been probably almost a year. So we were overdue for a little fireside chat.
We were. And hopefully we don't cry today. Somehow we tend to go into these subjects that take us into some pretty dark places of the world. But hopefully we can, we'll still cover some scary things, but we're not going to be digging into human trafficking and the things that are a little more difficult to get into. So it's interesting actually because you reached out to me recently and said, Seth, let's do a show together. And you're someone that I'm always like, okay, what are you doing right now? Because you've got so many interesting things that you're always working on. And whatever you work on, you're kind of putting your full brain power into, which makes it a really fun discussion. And so today, though, we're going to be getting into HAARP. And not just the weather modification, but I'd say something almost more sinister. And so I'll start with bringing up a tweet from a guy named Paul White Gold Eagle. Now, he's referencing Edward Snowden and some documents that he had seen. However, I can't confirm, like there's no link to the documents. So take this with a grain of salt. However, when you understand everything behind this makes much more sense. So we'll read it. I'll read through it just to help frame our discussion, but then we're going to be going into some really concrete evidence that I think in a lot of ways backs up exactly what this guy's talking about. So he says here, Edward Snowden has spoken again, and this time the silence broke the sky. Hidden files confirm what the Watchers denied for decades. HAARP is not science. It's a weapon, a global mechanism of control engineered to shape weather, thoughts, and even death itself. The atmosphere has been militarized. The human mind is a battlefield. From his refuge in Moscow, Snowden released a new trove of DARPA-linked documents exposing the true face of the high-frequency active Auroral Research Program, HAARP, in Gakona, Alaska. For years, they told the world it was a harmless experiment to study the ionosphere. They built it in the wilderness, far from witnesses. Now, the files show its purpose was never research; it was dominance. Now, again, I haven't seen these files or leaked data, but that's okay because we're looking at the bigger picture of this. According to leaked data, HAARP generates ultra-high power radio waves capable of penetrating biological tissue and disrupting neurological patterns. Targets can suffer strokes, cardiac failure, or psychological breakdowns that appear spontaneous. The deaths look natural. The insanity looks organic, yet both are engineered. NATO and its contractors use this technology to suppress voices, eliminate dissidents, and fracture resistance movements without firing a shot. Snowden's testimony describes how electromagnetic signatures are mapped to individuals and manipulated remotely. Once calibrated, a single frequency can push the brain into chaos. Rage, fear, confusion, all programmable. Entire populations can be nudged towards compliance or hysteria, the perfect invisible weapon. During his escape from Hong Kong, Snowden reported that he and WikiLeaks staff experienced bursts of directed energy designed to induce homicidal delusions. He built his current residence as a Faraday cage, sealed both against both static and pulsed fields. Every wall lined with copper mesh, every signal blocked. It's the only way to think freely, he said. The leaked documents include correspondence between DARPA, Air Force research divisions, and private defense contractors operating through the University of Alaska. They discuss synchronization between HAARP transmitters, commercial cell towers, and a surveillance grid known as trapwire. The network forms a planetary resonance field that can both gather and project data. In the wrong hands, it becomes an instrument of mass psychological conditioning. Independent analysis who reviewed the material confirmed its authenticity. One intelligence source described it as the missing link between electronic warfare and social control. Another called it the crown jewel of the modern deep state. These systems, once connected, could simulate divine phenomena, alter storm patterns, and even neutralize political targets through induced medical failure. Snowden's evidence also aligns with earlier testimony by Dr. Nick Begich, who warned in 2009 that HAARP could manipulate emotional states with ease. The combination of electromagnetic pulse and data analytics allows operators to read, influence, and erase emotional signatures across regions. It's not a theory anymore, it's functioning infrastructure. HAARP was never about the weather. It was about prediction and influence, shaping behavior, directing outcomes, steering history itself through frequency. The skies above are a screen, and every transmission is part of a code that decides who awakens and who falls silent. Snowden's message is clear. The war for control is not coming. It is already being fought quietly inside every signal, every network, every pulse that hums above our heads. The question is not whether HAARP exists. It's how deep the network runs and how long the silence can hold before the world begins to listen. The truth was never hidden in darkness. It was hidden in the noise. So I can say something really quick. I really want to hear you share your thoughts on this. But whether it's HAARP or the 5G network or any other things, like everything that I'm seeing him talking about here, the same exact concepts and ideas and even patents I've seen going back to, say, voice of God technology, or researching targeted individuals that say that they're being targeted through the exact same thing. And if you look at a lot of the mass murderers that, doing school shootings and whatnot, they're hearing voices in their heads. They're oftentimes on SSRIs, which I think makes them more vulnerable to these kind of influences. So everything that he says makes perfect sense. So anyway, I'll let you go ahead and kind of dive in and inform us a lot more on this.
Yeah, no, you're really over target, literally. They've had the term for a while now, electronic stalking or gang stalking. You hear people say all the time, and I mean, this goes back to shows you and I watched when we were kids in the 80s, like, tinfoil hat guys coming in and, they're beaming messages at me from Mars or, from the government, and they're trying to ruin me and control me. And I think we all thought it was the stuff of sci-fi, or, that poor man is a paranoid schizophrenic. But it turns out that I owe all of those people a huge apology. There probably weren't paranoid schizophrenics, because we have had this technology for a long time. So regardless of whether Snowden did this drop that Paul White, Gold Eagle, said he did or not on X last week, the technology is there. And, when you look at HAARP, which stands for the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, buried deep in the wilds of Alaska on 33 acres with 180 towers that transmit, and their goal, according to the joint project co-sponsoring groups, which is U.S. Navy, U.S. Air Force, and DARPA, what could possibly go wrong with those groups in control? Their goal is to beam these things up at the sky, ideally from 50 miles over planet Earth to 600 miles over planet Earth. That's their target zone. And yes, perfect. There's the picture. And I mean, it looks totally innocent, right? When you look at that. And they're playing around on 33 acres. But Snowden's point via Paul Gold Eagle was those towers you just showed on the screen there intersect with all of the cell phone towers and the other towers around the world and satellites. And they've got this grid worldwide that they are using like Wi-Fi repeaters to jiggle frequencies at the human person, the human cells, the human biology, and the human brain. And so while it sounds like the stuff of fantasy or delusion, and while if you fact check Paul Gold Eagle, all of mainstream media will be like, Snowden didn't make a new release. That's all bullpucky. I did a deep dive a year or two ago now and discovered that shockingly, not only do they have this technology, they have it down to a complete science, and they've had it since well before you and I were born, Seth.
Have you heard of the bearskin hoodie? Well, the smart people are locking in their winter gear now because this is hands down the best time to prep for the coming winter. So Bearskin's running a 60% off deal right now, but that's only if you get your hoodie earlier. This hoodie is built like a tank. 340 GSM microfleece, 10 pockets with a clean, rugged look. This looks awesome. Plus, it zips right into the heavy storm rain jacket to become 100% waterproof when you need it. So when it turns cold, wet, windy, you're not scrambling last minute. You'll get free US shipping, fast delivery, and you've locked in your winter gear already. That's a win-win. So do yourself a favor. Text the word Seth to 36912 to lock in your 60% off. Again, text Seth, S-E-T-H, to 36912. You'll get a link sent straight to your phone so you can check it out later if you're busy right now. And one more thing, when you support Bearskin, you're also supporting the Fallen Outdoors and the Hope for the Warriors Veterans programs. So you're not just buying great gear, you're backing a cause that matters. So don't wait till you're freezing to realize that your hoodie sucks. Get a Bearskin now while it's 60% off. Text Seth to 36912.
So one of the first things I stumbled across was a more recent attack. It was the U.S. Embassy in Havana shortly after Trump took office the first time. And, all of a sudden the embassy workers are like, whoa, I feel really, really ill. Like I'm hearing things. I've got tinnitus. I've got ringing in my ears. I'm dizzy and I'm nauseous and I can't think straight. But lo and behold, when I go to buy bananas at the bazaar in the city, I'm fine. It's only when I go back to work or back to sleep in my quarters here that I suddenly feel ill. Our State Department ended up taking it seriously, and they deployed 3 neuroscientific medical doctors down there to study the 25 embassy workers that were making these claims. And they put them through
Actually,
their
Leah,
cases.
I'll pull this up real quick. This is an article here. This is from 2021. This is on BBC, right?
Yeah.
Because I remember when this happened with Kamala. She was going to do a trip down there that got delayed. So here it says, Kamala Harris trip delayed over possible Havana syndrome case. And it says that her flight to Vietnam was delayed by several hours due to an anomalous health incident with similarities to so-called Havana syndrome, reports say. It says the mysterious syndrome first affected people at the U.S. and Canadian embassies in Havana in 2016 and 2017. It may be caused by directed microwave radiation. So it's like, hold on, is this BBC? They're actually admitting that they're not saying, online conspiracy theorists claim that it was this. They're saying it may have been caused by directed microwave radiation. So anyway, I'll let you continue.
No. Your point is well taken, and that's exactly what I was talking about. And thank you for backfilling some of the data I omitted when you and I were transferring assets earlier. But yeah, that's exactly the incident they're referring to, and you're absolutely 100% correct. It was mainstream media. I'm going to queue up or have you queue up the CNN clip in a minute, but they sent these State Department directed doctors down there, all these pointy hat geek type MDs, put the Havana embassy workers through all these tests. What they found were objective findings across the board, 100% on all of these affected workers. They had absolute balance disorders, inner ear disturbances. They noted for the record that the findings weren't a little bit abnormal. They were monstrously abnormal, super abnormal, and more to the point and more shockingly and more scary, they were displaying very disrupted cognitive disorder, cognitive processing patterns. Our ability to think and reason. I mean, that's really, nobody wants to lose that, right? Yeah, take out my left leg, but leave my brain alone. So yeah, BBC was reporting on it, and CNN, of all places, actually did a whole little piece on it. We've got that clip queued up. You want to roll it, Seth?
Sure. Yeah, it's 1:34.
Of unexplained illnesses, including head injuries, forced the U.S. to bring home diplomatic staff from China and Cuba. The scientist who led the investigation tells the New York Times the main culprit is likely some kind of microwave weapon.
It all began November 2016, right after the U.S. presidential election. And that is when U.S. diplomats based here in Havana said they begin to experience these really strange symptoms, often at night, sometimes while they're in bed, asleep in their homes or their hotel rooms here in Cuba. And they said that they would feel nausea, hear loud sounds, hearing loss. But if they got up out of bed, if they left the room where they were in, it would stop. If they walked back into where they had felt this incident, this attack as they described it, it would start again. So they felt that they were being targeted with some sort of mysterious beam of energy. Now we have scientists saying that perhaps it's a microwave weapon that shoots a beam of energy, and it can be pinpointed in the way these diplomats described both here in Cuba and in China, and that it can actually cause people to think they're hearing sounds, but this is just a symptom of this beam of energy. We don't know very little bit about these weapons because so few countries use them.
There are a couple things from that reporting, that there is some place of blame, or at least looking seriously at Russia. And then the other is, it's not just a very disturbing high-pitched noise, but there might even be voices or a message, a continual message.
There are a number of countries, including the former Soviet Union and now Russia, that have microwave weapon programs going back decades. There's some evidence that they've been used in other countries against U.S. diplomats, that this was a very active program. And it's kind of the perfect weapon because it leaves no trace.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, it's funny because as much as we get mocked for our conspiracy theories, if CNN says it, it's probably true. I mean, from this perspective,
it's God's
right?
word. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. The final chapter in that particular saga was the team of 3 expert doctors that were deployed concluded the incident was indeed a wide-scale use of electronics to carry out a so-called neurological weapons attack. So our guys were hit. This isn't sci-fi, and everybody, including mainstream media, was confirming that, along with the State Department. So you heard the guy say at the end, the girl was saying, oh my gosh, they can even encode messages and have you hear voices in there. True, very true. And apparently they've been able to do that for a darn long time. And then you heard the guy say, yeah, Russia's had this technology going back decades. So that made me, when I saw that clip, Seth, I was like, really? And I Googled it up. I wasn't even on DuckDuckGo. I'm just Googling away over here over lunch one day. And the next thing that came out was a Moscow attack. Similar presentation, our Moscow embassy workers, but in 1960. So longer than you and I have been alive. In 1960 are reporting all sorts of stuff. They're saying, hey, we feel sick. We can't make decisions. Our decision-making capacity is shot, chronic stress, low efficiency. And they're griping and moaning, and CIA and State Department are like, yeah, you probably got a flu virus, shake it off, you'll be fine. 2 years into it, with these guys unremittingly saying something is going on, CIA opens Project Pandora to study the effects of what might be going on in our little Russian embassy in Moscow. And to get to the bottom of it, they decide to put lab rats and guinea pigs in, literal lab rats and monkeys in cages into the basement of the embassy in Moscow to see how they're faring. Sure as shooting, the rats can't find the cheese in the maze. The monkeys are like, I don't know what you want me to do. I can't remember anything you tell me to do. I mean, it is a nightmare. The embassy, the senior embassy workers, all the embassy workers had a 40% increase in their white blood cell count. Anybody who knows anything about medicine knows something's wrong when you have 50% almost increase in your white cell count. And the embassy lead, our ambassador to Russia, died of some sort of weird leukemia-like, but not exactly leukemia disease. So Project Pandora goes on. At no point, Seth, in keeping with all of our government, experiments, at no point do they actually tell the embassy workers, hey, boys and girls, you might be being experimented on by, all sorts of weird electronic waves that the Russians are directing at you to see what can happen. This thing rolls until 1975. I have now been born. I'm 3 years old. 15 years. They allow our workers to get hit. When Henry Kissinger, and I see you've got some stuff up on the screen there, Henry Kissinger in 75 sends a telegram to the Russian embassy workers entitled Radiation and Electromagnetic Dangers. And they indicate, finally, after all this time when it's a little too late, beginning in 1960, the Soviet Union directed high-frequency beams of radiation at the U.S. embassy workers in Moscow, which were calculated not to pick up intelligence, but rather to cause physiological effects on our personnel. The effects the Soviets thought they were achieving included malaise, irritability, and extreme fatigue. At the time, the Soviets believed this would be temporary, but subsequently it's been verified that the effects are not temporary, and they are tied to such things as cataracts, blood changes that induce heart attacks, cancerous malignancies, circulatory problems, and permanent, not temporary, but permanent deterioration of the central nervous system. Scarily enough, in most cases, the quote, after effects do not become evident until long after exposure, a decade or more. So yeah, they've had this technology for freaking ever. We were late to the party in this little arms race to develop it. And yeah, I mean, it's the same exact play, different year out of the same exact playbook.
Exactly. So here, this is just something, this is I think what you're mentioning, they refer to as the Moscow signals. This is from 67 to 77. It starts here. It says, this is an article from 2022, but it says, on December 9th, 1975, as Secretary of State Henry Kissinger prepared to travel to Moscow for arms control talks, he placed an urgent phone call to Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin in Washington. He's saying, quote, I want to talk to you about the signal, the beam that you are beaming into our embassy in Moscow. Maybe you could turn it off when I get there. So he says, amid the banter, he talked about how the Soviets could give me a radiation treatment. So again, yeah, you're right. I mean, and one thing that I will say, actually, I'll make 2 points, just 2 kind of basic principles that I've come to understand through all my research. One, whatever technology that we see that is allowed to even be kind of put into the public sphere is already so far beyond the technology that we're being that's being hidden from us. That's one thing. The other thing is that whenever a government has any kind of weapon, they will always use it on their own people. Maybe not immediately, but they never just do these things to fight the bad guys. They're always finding ways or having contingency plans that if they have to use it on their own people or actively use it on their own people. So there's 2 points I've just kind of seen proved over and over again to be true.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they experiment on other countries' people, but there's no, the gloves are off. There's no stopping their experimentation on us without informed consent, in violation of Nuremberg and all the other, high-level international rules of engagement. They do it anyway. And then 10, 20, 50 years later, they go, oops, so sorry, we did this. Everybody who was involved is dead. Nobody cares anymore. Our bad. Moving on. But yeah, so we have these bookended things where, okay, the 50s and the 60s, clearly the Soviet Union and Russia had this technology all the way up until a couple of years ago. We're still getting embassy hits using, I'm sure, a more refined version of this technology. But sandwiched right in the middle there, I found an article about another project that allegedly was run out of our CIA. It was entitled Operation Crimson Mist. So you may remember the Rwandan genocide, April 6th of 1994. I'm just starting my law practice. We're all in our teens and early 20s, whatever. And the way it went down is the Rwandan president and his entire cabinet were flying into Rwanda or out of Rwanda when a hailstorm of cannon shells go ripping through this airplane's interior. Obviously, it torpedoes it straight to the ground where all aboard die immediately on impact. That is what we know for sure. The stink of it is that was not an accident. And the subsequent genocide where the Hutu tribe and the Tutsi tribe started warring with each other and killing each other over, oh, you killed our president, no, you killed our president, was not actually a native and organic disturbance, but one that was fomented under Operation Crimson Mist by our CIA. So allegedly, you can start running that clip if you have it. It's a silent clip, so I'll just talk over the top of it. But you had our CIA agents allegedly on the ground, on the tarmac there. They're giving disinformation to both tribes. Hey, Hutus, it's the Tutsis' fault. Hey, Tutsis, it's the Hutus' fault. They managed to stir up a disagreement between the two tribes to the point that they're lobbing rocks and spears at each other, but they're not homicidal. At that point, the CIA agents lift off in this C-130 airplane to fly at a very low level over the warring tribes with this big microwave dish that's been outfitted to the back of this thing. And allegedly, they are beaming radio waves and microwaves frequencies at the crowd. And yeah, that's the end of the clip. And within a nanosecond of them doing this, it looks like it's on repeat, all of a sudden, you've taken these tribes who are pissed off with each other to actually committing a genocide and killing a good portion of their own population over the ensuing couple of months. And, once again, Seth, it sounds like, okay, that just sounds like crazy talk. The fact that you could take a certain hertz wave, 5 hertz or 10 hertz or whatever, beam it at people and make them homicidal maniacs. But it's actually true. And they have had this technology going back a while. It was built on the back of Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher-Bies. She was an astrophysicist from the 1930s who was doing a lot of work up in northern Cal. She was the only woman in her undergrad program doing nuclear fusion work. That was in the late 60s, nuclear physics. In the 70s, she ends up attached to the Stanford Research Institute of Radiophysics. Then she moves on to the Lawrence Livermore Labs. Then she's attached to the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center. Then DARPA and NASA and the forerunners to all those, our DOD hear about her. They start contracting with her. And she's Einstein, female version. And she had warned in 1994, right around the time of the Rwandan genocide, she was actually out here in California, right up the hill in Lake Arrowhead. And she had been studying electronic waves, exceedingly low frequency. They're called ELF, extremely low frequency waves, which are naturally generated when the tectonic plates shift right in advance of an earthquake. So if you're studying these waves that sometimes come out of the ground in a very predictable pattern, a couple days in advance of an earthquake, there'll be a big uptick in the amount of these very low voltage waves, very low frequency waves. And so she's giving a presentation up in Lake Arrowhead in April of 94, and she's like, hey, you guys are going to have a really, really bad earthquake in excess of 7.0, probably in the next 2 weeks, I humbly predict. 10 days later, it was actually June of 94, she was giving that speech. 10 days later, we had a 7.5 earthquake in Landers, right down the hill from where she gave that speech. So that got me thinking, like, wow, if you can notice that an earthquake is impending by watching these naturally occurring waves, can you do the opposite? Can you induce these waves, shove them into the Earth's crust, and then set off a tectonic plate disturbance and create the earthquake? And the short answer to that question is hell yes, we can. And by the way, you want to take a gander as to how long they've been able to do that, Seth? Set off an earthquake by using these waves?
Probably since like the 50s. I mean,
even longer. 1898. It was Nikola Tesla. Yeah, I'm telling you, my mind was just blown. Like, I sat down to do 15 minutes of research over lunch. Like 2 weeks later and 390 browser tabs later, I'm like, the dog is looking at me like, are you ever going to end this research, Mom? It was crazy. So Nikola Tesla, Serbian inventor, everybody knows the Tesla coil, comes over here in the late 1800s with a nickel in his pocket, lives in New York City, gets a bright idea one day. I'm going to make a giant vibrating unit, and I'm going to strap it onto a steel beam in my New York City apartment and see what happens. Now, most people, if they discovered a giant vibrator, probably would have had a different thought as to what to use it for. But, this is Nikola Tesla. He's like, let me see if I can set off an earthquake. I'm not going to use it in the bedroom. I'm going to use it to set off an earthquake. So off he goes running errands, right, in the little horse-drawn carriage, early automobiles of the New York City. Comes back a couple hours later to find the authorities are breaking down the door to his apartment, dismantling his little experiment, taking off the vibrator from the steel beam. It had, in fact, caused the steel beam to vibrate. The steel beam from his apartment went all the way into the earth to, make sure the apartment stayed up. And the beam was vibrating, and it found a matching frequency somewhere subterranean that did its thing and set off a little earthquake, not in California where you would expect an earthquake, but in downtown Manhattan. So that was enough for the authorities to be like, no, no, no. And he's like, oh, well, next time I'll do it on a pier. And he went out to a pier that was under construction, another building, and he repeats the experiment. Finally, I think they're like done with him because all of a sudden you see him popping up 2 years later. It's a 1900 and he's in Colorado Springs. And he decides he's going to do this again. He's going to take exceedingly low frequency waves this time, not a big vibrator, waves, and beam them into the earth just to see what happens. Well, what happens is 25 miles away, 25 miles, half hour away if you're going 60 miles an hour. Edison, because Edison's racing to the light bulb all around the same time, has set up 200 street lamps in the city of Colorado Springs. They are not attached to anything, Seth. There's There's light bulbs in them, but they're not wired into the grid such as it was. They're just freestanding, waiting to be hooked up. So Tesla down the road starts playing with his frequencies. All 200 of Edison's street lamps turn on for like 2 days.
Ladies and gentlemen, our world is being poisoned. You know that. Every day we're exposed to more chemicals sprayed into our skies, leaching into our food, and polluting our air and water. From pesticides and heavy metals to hormone disruptors and synthetic additives, these toxins are bombarding our bodies and destroying our health. But there's something you can do to fight back, and it starts with your gut. Kimchi One from Brightcore Nutrition contains over 900 strains of beneficial probiotics that help flush toxins, restore gut balance, and support your immune system. So when your gut's strong, your body can actually resist all these toxins. You're going to feel better. You're going to have better digestion, more energy, clearer thinking, stronger immunity, even improvements in your skin, hair, and metabolism. And this isn't just hype. Studies show that fermented foods like kimchi can reduce the risk of obesity, improve blood sugar, and support whole body wellness. Kimchi One is all natural, non-GMO, dairy-free, gluten-free, and 100% made in the USA by a company that actually cares about your health. Imagine that. And today, you can get an exclusive offer just for my viewers. 25% off with the code MANINAMERICA by clicking on the link in the description below. Or just call my friends over at Brightcore now at 888-575-6488, and their educated staff will make sure that Kimchi One is right for you. Again, that's 888-575-6488.
The butterflies, as they're flying around, minding their own business, every time they pump their wings, little St. Elmo's fire blue halos are now shooting out of their wings of the moths and the butterflies. People are like, is it a new lightning bug? Like, what the heck is that? And then the most fascinating part is housewives like me go to turn on their tap to get some water to wash the dishes, and there's no water that comes out. Fire shoots out of the faucet for days. Fire shoots out the water faucets, in the region. So yes, they have been able to induce earthquakes and a whole menagerie of other very strange phenomena, like, butterflies that have halos of fire around their wings and fire shooting out of the tap since, before our grandparents were born. So pretty crazy stuff. There was a Project SEAL. It was another
Actually,
DoD
real quick,
thing.
sorry, before we jump, I want to mention some other thing about, so I remember doing some research on this, that after the Haiti earthquake, Hugo Chavez came out and blamed it on the U.S. I'm not sure if you saw this. This is from 2010. It says, quote, a tectonic weapon under testing by the United States caused the Haiti earthquake, according to Venezuelan leader Hugo Chavez, who appears to have more of a sci-fi background than we all thought. It says here that President Chavez said the U.S. was playing God by testing devices capable of creating eco-type catastrophes in a Spanish newspaper, saying that Chavez says the killer earthquake followed a test of weapon of earthquakes just offshore from Haiti. He did not elaborate on the source of his claim. So, I mean, and I'll just make just a quick point here, because if you look at the humanitarian disaster that was the Haiti earthquakes, you look at the Rwandan genocide as another example. You look at even going back into, say, the Spanish flu, when there's odd timing of when the Spanish flu came out. I think when they first started using radio waves, there's all these different instances where you have these mass catastrophes, whether they're weather related. Even looking at currently the earthquake the hurricane that's over Jamaica, that there's a lot of people that are noticing very abnormal weather patterns with it, how it paused right offshore, similar to Katrina, when Katrina came in and it kind of paused and just kind of hovered. And it just seems like how many of these catastrophes and pandemics and everything these different things that just kind of changed the course of human history, how many of them were just caused by people in a lab in some bunker, some CIA bunker? I think probably a lot more than we would think. But one thing you did mention, I'm not sure if you want to move on yet, but the Dr. Rauscher, we have a little short interview with her. Did you want to play that real quick before, or were you kind of working to that?
We'll come back to that in a second.
Okay.
Your statement about earthquakes got me thinking, and I was looking up another presentation I did on this 2 years ago. I think we all have suspected that with things like HAARP and DEW, directed energy weapons, that they can turn these hurricanes and tornadoes on a dime, create fires, you name it. I mean, we've all had our suspicions about Lahaina and the California fires. But in 1976, there was an allegation that the Chinese earthquake of 76, so I was 4 years old at this point, that killed 650,000 people in mainland China was not naturally occurring. To your last point, Seth, the New York Times actually reported, mainstream media again, that the night prior to the earthquake hitting, before the first tremor, the sky lit up like daylight. Lights were red and white in the sky, and they could be seen 200 miles away. Leaves on trees burned to a crisp. Remind you of Lahaina? That's not something that normally happens with earthquakes. And growing vegetables were scorched on only one side as if by fireball. That was a New York Times statement. I was 4 years old and in preschool. They were already looking at whether foreign governments were experimenting on other countries, or indeed, in this case, perhaps their own population, creating natural disasters, weather disturbances. And then that sort of segues into the work of a researcher by the name of, he was a professor at Auckland University, but I didn't put his name down here. And he had been using, again, these extreme low frequency waves underwater to see what happens. Well, what happens is it creates a little wave, but if you do it at the right angle with the right amount of whatever, these little waves can sort of have a ripple effect and create a tsunami. So he's experimenting down in Auckland, New Zealand, shortly after World War II, when all of a sudden our top secret US defense chiefs are eyeballing his work and going, hey boy, come work for us. And what they discovered is that you could induce tsunamis or tidal waves using this type of technology. And the public-facing statement on it was, quote, it could have played a role as effective as that of the atom bomb had only Project SEAL and this Auckland University professor discovered it before World War II instead of right after. So yes, they have been monkeying with our weather and with our earthquakes and with our tsunamis and with our everything for many, many, many years now. But again, back to Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher, who warned, when I was coming out of law school in 94, hey, boys and girls, you're going to have a big old earthquake because I'm measuring these waves and there's been an uptick. Yeah, you can reverse engineer it. You can watch the waves happen and predict the earthquake, but you can also create the waves and make the earthquake. And she was just, like I said the first time, a flippin' genius. So she ends up, she's at Berkeley, she's teaching a nuclear physics class, and she gets her students to agree to let a little machine she created be used against them as an experiment, allegedly non-harmful. And, all of her class goes, sure, teach, you got some new device you want to try out on us, go for it. So she beams half of her Berkeley graduate students with this energy, this frequency, and immediately, Seth, they're all like, oh, they're just, they look like they're having an epileptic fit. Their teeth are chattering uncontrollably. They're shaking uncontrollably. They look like they've been left outside in an Alaskan snowstorm mid-February for like a week. And the other half of the class that she had not beamed looks over at the Professor Elizabeth Rauscher-Biest, and goes, nice party trick, my dear. How much did you have to pay the other half of the class to put on that little Oscar-worthy performance? And she goes, oh, you think they're just play acting? And she beams it at them, the non-believing side, and the whole class is just decimated and shaking in their chairs. So they get the attention of CNN. Again, mainstream media. Again, when I'm a kid, I'm talking, I've got my hair out to here. It's 1980 something. I'm wearing neon green and yellow. I'm in sixth grade. I think I'm cool as a cucumber. Well, I'm not watching CNN at this point in time, but CNN has a correspondent that does these deep dives, a multi-part series by the name of Chuck Del Caro. And he goes to the lab of this woman, Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher-Biest, and her husband, who's an equally crazy genius. And he agrees to be blindfolded and muffled. They put earmuffs on him so he cannot hear, cannot see anything. And he agrees to let them beam a signal into his brain that is carrying an encoded message, a very simple message of a geometric shape, like a square or a circle or a triangle. And the instructions, and I'm giving you a little bit of a preview because the audio is a little bit fuzzy because it's such an old clip. The instructions you hear the couple tell Chuck Del Caro, the correspondent, is, hey, just call out whatever geometric shape you see flying by. And at one point you hear the reporter go, a parabola just flew by. If you've got that clip, let's roll it because it's pretty persuasive.
CNN enlisted the help of noted physicist Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher and electrical engineer Bill Van Weiss to build and test an RF mine interference machine from data found in Soviet scientific literature. The machine itself was inexpensive and easy to construct, using parts from a consumer electronics store. It emits a weak magnetic field, pulsed at extremely low frequency. As the subject of the test, I was blindfolded, and my ears were blocked. A magnetic probe was placed about 18 inches from my head. 2 signal generators produced waveform patterns that were transmitted by the magnetic probe.
Describe anything that you see.
Parabola just went by.
Later, I asked Van Bice what a weapon using this technology could do.
Induce basically what would be considered hallucinations in people, direct them to do things against their so-called better judgment.
How easy would it be to assemble a weapon from existing off-the-shelf parts?
In 3 weeks, I could put together a weapon that would take care of a whole town.
3 weeks, I could build a weapon that would take care of a whole town from consumer electric parts.
From Radio Shack, yeah, basically. So that was what the husband said on CNN. The wife, Dr. Rauscher-Bies, who was the real brains of the operation, is on record having said, this is the quote, "Give me the money and 3 months' time, and I will be able to affect the behavior of 80% of the people in any town without their even knowing it. Make them happy, or at least they'll think they're happy, or make them aggressive." And I'm not going to disclose it on here because we don't need, the next Unabomber to be listening to Lee and Seth and get the evil recipe. But you can actually direct a certain hertz, voltage, frequency, whatever. And, if you peg it at this numerical marker, it will induce depression. You increase it 1.5, it will now not induce depression in a normal subject, but lead to an altered state associated with pleasant feelings. The high you get after you've had 3 beers or something else at a fraternity party. You go three rings on the ring over that, and now you are inducing riotous behavior. So as you can imagine, there is one hell of a lot of potential military applications. They alluded to it a little bit in the last clip, but CNN was interviewing a Nobel Peace Prize winner or candidate, and this guy was on record. This is the next one. I think it's frequency 6 or something, if you have it there, Seth. But he was talking about what it could do in a military context.
We showed the results of our test to Dr. Robert Becker, a 2-time Nobel nominee for his work in the biological effects of electromagnetism.
Could markedly influence the operations of a fighter pilot. The effect of that upon the efficiency with which an Army, an Air Force, or a Navy would operate would be catastrophic.
Chuck DeCaro, CNN, Special Assignments.
It's just... Yeah, I'll let you continue, and then I'll get into my thoughts. But this is wild.
It is absolutely wild, and you can look at the hair, you can look at the suits, and you can realize that you were either a teenager or, in grade school or not even born yet when these boys were doing this expose in the 80s. I mean, they have had this technology for literally almost 50 years, and it's been an open secret. And, we lost that fighter pilot and plane that went down, I think, in the Carolinas a year or two ago. And it was coincidentally the same week that I first found that clip. And me and my husband, I asked him to, pull the clips out of these 3 hours of, CNN documentary. And all of a sudden, we're eating dinner and we see the news about the plane going down on the East Coast. And he goes, maybe it was just a natural occurrence and fell out of the sky, or maybe somebody beamed a weapon. At either thing, you've got, it's a target-rich environment. They can beam it at the electronics of these fighter jets, just jam the technology and the thing falls out of the sky. Or they can beam it at the head of the guy in the cockpit. The machinery is working great, but the machinery up here ain't working at all. And now he's just not doing what he needs to do to come in for a landing, and he falls out of the sky. So, yeah, there's a severe amount of applications, a lot of which are nefarious, that they can put this to. And the final words from CNN, where they went over to the Pentagon, you see Chuck DelCaro in a second standing in front of the Pentagon and going through the fact that this is scary stuff and governments everywhere are playing with it. And our government is not exactly coming out and saying yay or nay as to whether they're using it or not. But they then interviewed a classified guy with classified intel who refused to be named on the video. And you can see here what he says. It's pretty crazy. Go ahead and roll that if you got it.
She stated that the research was carried out on orders from the Soviet government. Is the United States military working in the field of electronic mind control? Officially, the Department of Defense will not comment because the subject area is, quote, too sensitive. But CNN has learned from this government scientist, who did not want to be identified, that a Navy laboratory conducted research into the use of an RF device for counterterrorism and special operations.
It's possible to entrain a certain percentage of a population, apparently, with weak magnetic fields.
The study also showed that RF signals could dissolve certain types of rat brain cells at a distance, causing disorientation and nausea. According to the scientists, even though the program was successful, the government never followed up on it. The Department of Defense will not comment about Soviet RF weapons. However, experts interviewed by CNN say that the Soviets are apparently ahead and could exploit that lead in a surprise strategic move. A move that could have grave consequences for the United States. This is Chuck DeCaro, CNN Special Assignments.
I thought the clip where it says, sorry, just a little line there where they say, if they work with the scientists and then they decide to not follow up with it. It's like, oh, okay, so that maybe they stopped the research. It was too dangerous.
Too dangerous. I'm sure they stopped. Yeah, Russia was ahead of us, but it was too dangerous, the fact that you could dissolve rat brain cells and entrain a certain segment of the population using weak electronic waves. Of course, we're just going to push pause on that and let Russia get they've already got the jump on us. We're just going to let them continue to do what they're doing, which, by the way, what they were doing, the old lady you saw, but they didn't really let her speak much because she had a horrible Russian accent after she immigrated here. She brought all the technology to our DOD that they had for 15, 20 years in Russia. And she's like, oh yeah, we've been able to kill the cow in a 3-mile radius by just like melting his brain for, a couple decades, and you guys can't do anything. So our government was way behind. You and I both know they don't like being way behind on anything. And it is highly doubtful that they just discontinued their research in this regard. But yeah, all of that work in Russia built on the back of primarily one guy by the name of Kosnechev. And it's really scary, but it's also really phenomenal. And I want to read you the whole quote, if I may, because it'll segue us into a little bit of a less dark area. The quote is, Seth, the Kosnechev experiments in the Soviet Union proved that any cellular death and disease pattern, cancer, autoimmune, infertility, any cellular death and disease pattern can be induced by a specific electromagnetic pattern carried on a certain electromagnetic signal if the target cells are bombarded with the pattern carrying carrier signals for a long enough period of time. Let me put it in third grade English. If they bombard your cells long enough with this wave that carries the right signature, they can create any type of death and disease they want in your body if they do it long enough. Here's the good news. What was not published of this man's work, Kosnechev's work, was his corresponding work showing electromagnetic reversal of cellular death and disease conditions. They have the answer to everything that ails us. They can induce sickness and cancers and death, but they have also had the answer to a lot of these conditions, if not all of them, for a very long time. So that was Kosnechev's work in the 50s. It goes underground because nobody wants to be able to cure cancer. You can't do that. You can't cure anything, right? So it goes underground for 20 years. And then a French scientist, a doctor by the name of Antoine Priore, Priore, in the 70s, when I'm a little kid, toddler, gets some backers, and he starts making this little device that's like a shoebox, and he puts rats that have, cancerous tumors in their body, monkeys with certain diseases, and he puts them inside this thing. But he learned early on, you had to have the entire body of the animal inside, including the tail, including the hair. And, they always tell us, oh, hey, your hair is dead after it leaves your scalp. Well, if it's really dead, why did this French doctor have to get the hair and everything else into the box to clear out the disease? So he's putting these animals that are sick as dogs into this little shoebox, zapping them with the right frequency, and bing, bang, boom, they're cured of whatever ails them. So a bunch of billionaire backers get behind him, again, in the 70s. You can find some French news articles. I have one, but I forgot to share it with you, Seth, before the show. It's a French language newspaper, and they got a picture of the Dr. Antoine Priore, and he's standing looking up at this enormous 4-story tall structure that he has made. It had to be that tall to get the frequency to the right level that he could put a human being in. And they're getting ready to release this to the entire world in the 70s. Oh, when once again, somebody didn't want that to actually become mainstream news, and they put the kibosh on it. And here we go for another 20, 30 years, suspecting that there's something that can cure what ails us, but not actually having the actual shoebox or the generator or the whatever you call these pieces of equipment. But I stumbled a couple of years ago. My husband had some eczema, and psoriasis after one of the events we went to. And his face was the color of like a cherry tomato. I mean, it was redder than that. And we were down visiting some friends in Florida, and they ended up going, oh, we've got this frequency device and we can use it on your husband. And, you know, it'll make his little psoriasis, eczema, rashy thing go away. And they told me how much it costs. And I'm like, look, I'm broke. I've been like giving everything I've got to the freedom fight. I don't have a pot to, you know what, in. But, you know, if while we're staying here, you want to, I was looking for a picture of it. If you want to go ahead and, you know, do your thing with your little hairdryer type thing on my husband's face, knock yourself out. No kidding, Seth. It looks like a ginormously long red hairdryer. They beam it at my husband's face. He's sitting there like he's at a salon, you know, and I'm like, what kind of woo-woo BS is this? 10 minutes after they get done hair drying my husband's face, it looks 50% better. The next morning, he's like cured. His skin looks like a newborn baby. I'm like, okay, what is this machine and how much does it cost? My husband and I bought the machine. To this day, my husband walks around with his little machine every day, like clockwork, out of the shower. He's in there. He uses it as a hairdryer. He uses it all over his little naked body, probably TMI. We go to a Clay Clark event. It's in his carry-on. He's like, oh, don't check my carry-on. We don't want to break the crystals or whatever is in there. But this thing is magic. They had a horse, a big old horse in Florida, had a cancerous tumor behind its eyeball. And there was nothing too gory going on. It was just slightly bulging. The owners got the vet over. They're like, yeah, your horse has cancer. You need to put him down. They're like, no, we don't want to put our horse down. Next vet comes out. Well, we could take your horse's eyeball out with the tumor, but then you're going to have a blind horse. And the owners are like, no, we don't want to do that. So they use this machine on it. You're in the Midwest, or used to be in Ohio, I think, right, Seth? You're in horse country, right? I grew up with horses. If you know anything about a horse, they do not want to stand still while you run a very loud, noisy hairdryer thing at their eyeball. Nobody wants that. Not even a human that's got social skills and like, okay, fine, you can hit my face even though it's not comfortable. This horse must have intuitively sensed it was doing something good, because by day 2, they're ground tying the horse. They're letting their hands off the lead rope. The horse is just standing there still as a statue, letting this hairdryer be used on its eyeball. So a day or 2 into it, all of a sudden you see the eyeball get really big, really bug-eyed. And then a day after that, a thing that's about the size of a cherry tomato, looks like a shiny, slimy cherry tomato, comes hanging out of the eyeball. It extrudes out between the eyelid and the eyeball. There's this big cherry tomato hanging out. And then the next day, the thing falls out and the horse is fine. No more cancer. Crazy town. So my pastor friend calls these technologies the alleged med beds that are coming out. I think Trump might have truth socialed about it for a day and then took the post down a week ago. Charlie Ward talks about it, all the people in the freedom movement. You know, we've been hearing about the Rife technology, the med bed technology, the frequency, the PEMF mats, but we are starting to actually get to the point where this technology isn't just some crazy scientist in a DOD basement somewhere. It's actually being made available to the masses. One of the most brilliant things is a water. There was a Hungarian scientist whose daughter got pancreatic cancer. Mainstream med was like, sayonara, see you later, go home and die. Nobody cures that. This Hungarian scientist was like, I don't want my 20-year-old daughter to die. So he created a water. The water is not the magic. The water is basically the delivery vehicle for a very stable oxygen unit. And you drink a glass of this water and crazy stuff happens. His daughter, you can't say the C word, the 2 C words in the same sentence, but in Europe, the daughter that was about to die of pancreatic cancer started drinking this water that daddy created, and suddenly she's totally fine. She's still alive years later. So daddy makes a Medi-spa in Hungary where people bathe in the water if they've got really bad conditions. And all of the people who bathe in the water come in really sick as dogs and they walk out fine. And one of them was a very autistic kid. The kid had never spoken a word, 14-year-old violent autistic boy. My friends who are bringing this water to America were there to cure their own problems. And my girlfriend's a real big believer in communication. So every morning she would do an exaggerated wave and a hello to the autistic kid who's zero attention. You know, she's like, hi, so-and-so. And he's like, you know, stemming and flapping and not making eye contact. And on a few days in, she goes, hi, so-and-so. And he looks up and he goes, hi. And his mother from Armenia bursts into tears and in broken English says, he never speak a word. He said, I love you, Mama, this morning and gave me a hug. 4 days later, the younger brother goes, hey, buddy, it's time for your water bath. And this 14-year-old kid who had never spoken a word for 14 years prior to this week looks at the brother, holds up his hand, says in a minute in his native language, and finishes coloring a picture inside the lines. Prior to that week, he had no fine motor control. He couldn't color, he couldn't talk, and sure as shooting, he couldn't multitask and do those three things at one time. That is the kind of reversals they are seeing with this oxygen water. And it's not Kingian, it's not hydrogen, it's literally like a hyperbaric chamber in a glass of water. If you know anything about disease thrives in low oxygen environments. You want to be a healthier person, get oxygen in your body. This was a woman who had gnarly blood. You do not want to take your blood and put it under a microscope and have it look like this chick's. 60-year-old lady, it looks like the Hawaiian island chain. She drinks a glass of the water. They take her blood 2 minutes later, same blood after drinking the water. It is absolutely phenomenal. The University of Italy at Milan had a woman who ran her thumb through a saw, and they threw some water in the bandage, and they're like, too bad, so sad. You learned in third grade science class, if you cut off your finger or a tip of it, it doesn't regrow. We're not salamanders, and we sure aren't starfish. They take off the bandage, and a little while later, her missing piece of thumb regrew. The researchers and doctors were like, what? That is counter to everything we've ever been told. Turns out when they looked at the causal mechanism for how that could happen, there's a gene in our body responsible for making appendages, and it's very active when you're in your mother's stomach, in utero, and after you're born, the little gene looks around and he goes, well, you got all 20 of your fingers and toes and your arms and your legs. Peace out. My work here is done. Never to ever be brought out of hibernation unless you get enough oxygen in your body. And then apparently you can bring that gene out of hibernation and make it regrow pieces of your body. Again, I'm not making claims. I'm not making representations. I'm just telling you what happened at the University of Italy. So if you're interested in the water, it's on my website. My mommy gave me extra letters. It's Leigh Dundas, LEIGHDUNDAS.com. If you go to that healthy living page, you can see it for yourself. And the last thing I would love to chat with you about is it's a combination of frequency and cell work. Basically, there are stem cells. If you don't know anything about stem cells, they're like little baby cells in your body, and they have not decided what they want to be when they grow up. And it's just like your kid. Your kid could be a race car driver, a veterinarian, or a podcaster, or a lawyer. And the stem cells the same way. You put him in a guy's body and the guy's got an injury, he can get down to brass tacks and he can make new kidney tissue if you've got a low functioning kidney. He can make new fat. Not something most people our age want more of, but he could make new fat. He could make new bone. What he can really do that people our age are very much interested in is new cartilage. You got a bone-on-bone knee, you wore out your knee from jogging too many years. Now you're looking at a knee replacement. It can pump up that cartilage, make new cartilage. If you've ever seen, there's my picture. This is a before and after photo. You're supposed to have a thick black line of cartilage between your thigh bone and your lower leg bones. This lady had virtually no black line because she'd worn out the cartilage. She's driving her tires on a bald tire basically here. But after the stem cell injection, you can see that thick black line indicative of the cartilage having pumped back up. These stem cells make new cartilage. It is absolutely fascinating. There are basically zero side effects. They have done this thing over and over again in Europe, here in America. Zero side effects as long as you keep a sterile field. And pharma hates us. Orthopedic surgeons hate us. And the FDA, after allowing it to be done in our country in the middle of the pandemic, said, too bad, so sad, you're done. You're taking way too much money away from pharma and the surgeons. We're not going to let you do it anymore in America on an experimental basis. And so everybody was sort of doing a back alley thing where they're like, I'm going to go to my doctor and see if I can talk him into it. And the doctor's like, don't ask, don't tell. I'll do it for you, but I'm not supposed to do it for you. But thank God for the state of Utah, because about a year ago in May, on my birthday weekend last year, the state of Utah said, you know what, federal government, this is a crock. The way we remember high school science class and civics class is if you were not given the power specifically and it was not granted to the federal government, all the untalked about powers, they are reserved to the states. Washington and Lincoln never said you could regulate stem cell. That was before their time. So we think we have the right to legislate healthcare in our state. You can do what you want federally, and you can say you can't do it in the country anymore. We're going to say as long as it is not from aborted fetal tissue, as long as it's from the umbilical cord or something like that on a full-term healthy, happy birth, you can do whatever you want in our state as long as you get informed consent. And so that's what we've been doing. My husband had a stem cell clinic from 2016, couldn't do anything during COVID, but we were operating in most of the country. Now we're back operating in Utah. And I'm telling you, Seth, the stuff they're doing, I think this was like Mayo Clinic, but they had a guy, a surfer, little old guy. He's got gray hair. He took a header off his surfboard in San Diego, right down the road from me. He was a quadriplegic for years. They dropped some stem cell on his spinal cord. ABC News is in his backyard, April 2nd, 2024. What is this guy doing? He is walking around his backyard pool deck with a cane, not a walker, a cane. How many quadriplegics do you know, Seth, who are walking? Pretty crazy stuff. They're using it to repair blown tendons. This was a racehorse. He clipped his front flexor tendon in his front leg, totally severed the tendon with his back hoof when he was in a race. They were going to shoot the horse on the track. The owner said, no, let's try stem cell therapy. Maybe we can avoid a bullet in the horse's brain. Not only did they get the horse vertical and walking, which would have been a huge win, they actually ran the same horse that blew out his tendon in a 22 steeple jump, 4-mile race a year after the fact, and he won. He didn't just finish the race, he won. So it's incredible stuff. Again, we're blessed to be living in these scary times, but for every scary application of frequencies, of cellular things, they can beam our head, they can give us some new crazy lab-made disease. There is an equal and opposite body of research that it is incumbent upon the freedom fighters who have an Einstein brain that I do not have to get out in front of this so that we can actually get this going for the good of humanity and not for evil purposes like all the evildoers want to do. If you could cue up that last video of the guy with the beard, this is from the horse's mouth, a guy that we treated some years ago, and you can sort of hear from his perspective how the stem cells worked in his body.
Yeah, for only 3 weeks, this is amazing. I could turn my head left to right without having a chiropractic adjustment before and after. Daily, sometimes multiple times a day, stress hot in the neck. That would then lead to a headache and make me a kind of grumpy person. Grumpy Gus was a term used on one of my reviews. So I had to kind of like moderate myself and eat more aspirin. Since the shots, 0. This is amazing. You know, I mean, I'm talking 20 years I've been dealing with this.
So that was an actual patient. We met him in San Francisco. He was a tech exec. He's like, all right, do my neck. It's all locked up. I'm going to see if this works. It worked. He called us back. He goes, that worked brilliantly. Where are you guys next weekend? I'm like, oh, we're in Santa Barbara next weekend. He goes, I'm coming to do my low back. Calls us 3 days later. He's like, now I can turn my head like an owl and I can bend over and palm the floor. Before he couldn't touch his knees, his low back was so tight and jacked up. He said, where are you next weekend? I said, Palm Springs, and I love you, Dawn, but you know we can do more than one shot at a time. I mean, we could continue to see you every weekend until you die, or you could, however many bad joints you have left, we could just do them in one fell swoop. So he laughed and he goes, yeah, I was just guinea pigging myself, making sure this stuff worked, but I'm bringing myself back. You're going to do all the rest of my joints, my knees, my hips, my shoulders, and my wife, who is actually worse. She has rheumatoid and osteoarthritis. She can't even keep up with me. We treated him again for the final time, and his wife called him a week later. They're like, don't call us, we'll call you. We're hiking the Great Wall of China for the next 4 months. So that got to be a running joke at our office. We go to do a follow-up, and I'd hear this like, and I'm like, are you at Machu Picchu or the Great Wall of China or the Egyptian pyramids? And you'd hear the patient go, how'd you know? And I'm like, because we told you to take it easy, and I'm betting you're feeling great, and you're doing what all the other patients do and ignoring the doctor's orders and hiking, aren't you? And they're like, yeah, I'm in Yosemite. You called it, you know. So anyway, again, there's no sense for people to be suffering with any sort of any condition, whether it's autoimmune, neurodegenerative, cancer, or whatever. There are technologies. If you want to learn more about them, go to the Healthy Living page on my website at leedendis.com. Reach out. We'll give you a call. We'll walk you through whatever your questions are. And then, Seth, my final call to action for our audience here is, if you have the kind of brain that I don't have, please continue to build on the work of Kosnechev and all of these Hungarian researchers with the water and all the guys who invented the stem cell and pulling it from the umbilical cord, because we are at the brink of a renaissance, and boy, we need to get there sooner rather than later.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think that in summary, you make a really important point. It's very easy to focus on the negative applications of this technology, but I believe that how God made this world is that there's a duality, there's good and evil, there's up and down, there are opposites. And I think that there is a good to everything bad that's being done. So, I mean, imagine if the government was saying, wow, we can use HAARP technology to improve the mood of our citizens. We can create a happy country. We can heal diseases. It's like, just imagine. But the good thing is I do believe that the balance of power is shifting, and that there is a collective strength of just goodness and virtue that's reemerging. And so I hope that we see these things coming out sooner. And so, Lee, always a pleasure speaking with you. You've got such a good energy about you, and I love having these talks. So I look forward to next time. I'll make sure that your website link is in the show description for people to kind of follow along and go follow up on a lot of these things that you're talking about. And yeah, thank you again for everything that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank all the people in our tribe. We would be living in Auschwitz, I think, right now, but for all the pushback that the truth tellers and the people who hate injustice put forth over the last 5 years. And we're winning. We've got good people in power now. Bobby Kennedy is in charge of HHS instead of the evildoers. He's a big fan of all this type of technology, from the frequency to the stem cell to you name it. So I think we're entering a new day and age. And boy, it's great to be alive. And with that, I will leave all of you. Seth, I know you got good stuff and puppies in the house and kids. And we're going to be adopting a new puppy too here in a couple of weeks. So there'll be puppies everywhere, and rainbows and unicorns hopefully in our future. And as always, it was an honor to share your platform. Thanks so much for having me on, and I look forward to the next time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.